Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna. Before I begin, I would like to just ask the Vaishnavas present and Vaishnavis present. In case I make any mistakes in telling this story, please kindly excuse me. And for those who are especially here who are from the class of 68 and 69 and who were direct participants, please correct me privately afterwards. Hare Krishna. Okay.
Hold that mic a little closer to your mouth.
Yeah, let's try that one. No? Yeah, try that one. Okay. That's the one. Okay, so I'm going to condense this so that we're not late for prasadam, since I don't want you to be in any anxiety about prasadam. Okay, the story begins, today's story begins in 1968. Srila Prabhupada has just recovered from his heart attack and has returned to America. He has finished translating the second canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he's in the midst of the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. But there's no money in ISKCON, which had 6 centers, or thereabouts, 6 or 8 centers. There's no money to even print the second canto. There's barely enough funds to reprint the original Srimad Bhagavatam volumes that Prabhupada came to America with, although they were reprinted from India. So even though there's no money, Prabhupada is very busy translating because, as we know, the 60 volumes of books, the thousands of disciples, the hundreds of centers, and the millions of books being distributed is just separated by a little bit of time. In Prabhupada's vision, it was always going to happen. It just separated a little bit by time. So, Srila Prabhupada had this plan to, in following the order of his spiritual master, who declared a print press to be the great mridanga, the greater mridanga, a mridanga whose sound can be heard much greater distance than the playing of the mridanga in a kirtan party. So, in pursuance of that vision, Srila Prabhupada wanted to have his own press. So, he needed disciples who would be trained in the craft, in the art of printing. And that involves running a printing press, running a folding machine, running binding machines, doing composing, doing photography. There's a lot of different aspects to the printing industry in the 1960s. But Prabhupada did not want to start a press in a rented building. He didn't want to make the investment unless it was in a building that ISKCON owned. And at this point in time, every temple that we had in the world was being rented. The classic model was storefronts, but we had gotten a house we were renting in Hawaii, and we had gotten a house we were renting in Montreal, but they were just rentals. And because the funds were so scarce, each temple president, pretty much, had to go out and have an outside full-time job just to pay the rent on the rented temples. Dayananda Prabhu was paying the rent by working in an outside job in Los Angeles. Jayananda Prabhu was paying the rent by being a taxi cab driver in San Francisco. Satsarup, I can't remember what his job was, but he was paying the rent for the Boston temple by working a job. Thank you. That's not considered a correction. That's considered a addition. Thank you very much. A social worker. Yes. So anyway, Prabhupada wanted to create a centralized ISKCON press for printing the books that he was translating and to print Back to Godhead magazine. He only wanted to do it in a house that we would own. So he decided to initiate the first ISKCON transcendental competition. Later years, we had competitions for book distribution. Prabhupada would say, whoever distributes the most books, I will come and stay in that temple. So for those of us who were in the class of 70, 71, and 72, we thought that was the first transcendental competition in ISKCON, but it wasn't. The very first transcendental competition in ISKCON's history began in 1968, when Srila Prabhupada wrote letters to all the temples in North America. London wasn't part of this. He wrote letters to Boston, to Montreal, to Kirtananda and Hayagriva in New Vrindavan, to Jayananda, to Tamal in L.A., to Govindadasi and Gaursundar in Hawaii. And all the letters said the same thing. He wanted to establish ISKCON Press, and this would become the heart of ISKCON. This was so important. And in the letters he said, whoever can buy the first building, that is where I will put ISKCON Press. And then he said, as an extra incentive, and that is where I will go and stay to write my books. That was the real prize of this transcendental competition. So all through 68 and early 69, these devotees in all these centers were going crazy how to buy a temple, how to get enough money to buy a temple. Tamal was, whatever they were doing to collect money, they were putting it aside, looking for a temple. You know, you needed $5,000 or $10,000 as a down payment back then to buy a building. But that was a tremendous amount of money. Just to give you an idea of how hard it was to have that kind of money in ISKCON, in 1968, we were printing, it was really the only book we were distributing primarily, was Back to Godhead magazine. And Prabhupada had arranged to, with a printer in Japan, Dai Nippon, he makes his first order that every month we guarantee we will print 2,000 magazines a month. That's it. 2,000 magazines a month, and you will ship them, and we will have a line of credit, and as we sell them, we will pay. We will pay for them. And Prabhupada said, and eventually we will also print our books with you, so you will also give us a second line of credit. So we'll have a magazine line of credit and a book line of credit. So it was so hard in 1968 to sell 2,000 magazines. Prabhupada finally wrote these very firm, strong letters to the different temples saying, this is what I'm going to do. I am going to have Dai Nippon send 500 magazines a month to your temple. And you're going to pay for them. I don't care how. If you have to get a job, I don't care. You will pay me 10 cents a copy. You will send the money to me, which is being managed by Brahmananda, and we will send it to Brahmananda, and then you can sell the magazines, the 500 magazines, and by selling them somehow or other, you can help support your rent. But you must pay for 500 magazines or for 250 magazines. And he divided it up, so amongst the North American temples, it added up to 2,000 magazines. And I can tell you that by the end of 1969, we had such a big debt with Dai Nippon on this line of credit for the magazines that they were very reluctant to ever start printing the Krishna book because we owed so much money on the magazines. And Prabhupada ingeniously told them, but wait, that's a whole different department. One has nothing to do with the other. I'll get to that. I'll get to it when we get to the Krishna book. But so that's how hard it was. And those of you who are in that class of 66, 67, and 68 will remember how austere and hard things were. There was no money. But Prabhupada launched this transcendental competition to buy a building, which you'll need a minimum of $5,000 or $10,000 for a down payment. So anyway, after 1 year of this transcendental competition and this anxiety, and everyone's saving up money, and Tamal was thinking he was going to buy a house in Beverly Hills with a $5,000 down payment. It didn't happen. But anyway, everyone was Hansa Duda thought he was going to buy a building in Montreal. Kirtananda and Hayagriva were negotiating. They had a farm, and you couldn't lug the press equipment up the hills. So there was a house right next door to what we originally called New Vrindavan, and they were in negotiations. They were so convinced they were going to buy this house right next door, this little house, and that was going to become ISKCON Press. Gorsunda was trying in Hawaii. Everyone was trying so hard. The transcendental competition was won by Satsarup and Giriraj in Boston. Somehow or other, Giriraj convinced his father to give us $5,000. And they put down the down payment on, I think it was a funeral parlor originally that went out of business. Because I know it had a little elevator in it. Casket maker. So something along those lines. That was the line of business. And by September, we owned the first building in ISKCON's history. I think it was 40 North Beacon, something like that? 38 Beacon. Okay. It's not bad for these old memory cells. Okay, so we are now into 1969. Now, at the beginning of 1969, while we're waiting for this transcendental competition to bear fruit, Prabhupada is in the middle of translating the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. There's still no money to print the second canto. We can barely reprint the first. He's already writing the third and so on. And in the middle of the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, something amazing, extraordinary happens. Prabhupada feels, I don't know how to describe it, so I'm not a poet. I don't have the right words. But somehow Prabhupada hears the desperate, desperate cry that people don't even hear it coming from their own souls, but he hears the crying out of millions and hundreds of millions of souls throughout the world. They're crying out because they have no idea who God is. He hears this and he stops translating the Srimad Bhagavatam and decides that he is going to give the world for the very first time the truth about who is God. What does he look like? What are his activities? Where does he live? What are his pastimes? For Prabhupada to stop translating the Srimad Bhagavatam was a monumental event that can only be caused by Prabhupada feeling this desperate, desperate need of all the souls in the world who had no idea who is God. So he announces to the devotees that he's going to start writing the Krishna book. Now, I was not there, so I don't know how much or how little these devotees in 1968, 69 knew about Krishna. I don't know, but I suspect that most of the pastimes of Krishna that we all know and love were not known to the devotees of that era. They may have heard a few stories about Krishna that Prabhupada had shared, but I mean, the whole Krishna book, the whole 10th canto, how could you know that? So the devotees were so ecstatic to hear this. So even before Prabhupada starts dictating his tapes for the Krishna book, he also has this other transcendental vision that in order to truly show the world who God is, he's going to start a school for spiritual art, transcendental art. He's going to, amongst his disciples, create great artists who are going to be able to paint the unlimited beauty of God, the unlimited power of God, the unlimited beauty of God's abode. So he's thinking of this as part of how he's going to plan out his cultural conquest of the world through Krishna consciousness. So even before he starts dictating the Krishna book, he writes a letter to Jadharani, who's in Boston. This is in the beginning of 1969. He says, I will need you and others to paint for this book. Here is the first 5 paintings that I want. And he lists them and then describes them in detail of what the pastime is. He says, I want you to start painting from this letter. And 2 weeks later, Srila Prabhupada sends her the second letter. He hasn't started dictating the Krishna book yet. Here are the next 4 paintings that I want for the Krishna book. No one's heard the tapes yet. No one's heard the stories yet. There's just these letters. Prabhupada's already, he sees how he wants Krishna's pastimes to be revealed to the world. So Jadharani starts painting at the beginning of 1969, and to make a very long story short, she gets very, very sick. She's ordered by Prabhupada to stop painting. And in fact, he sends her to Hawaii to try to recover. And she doesn't get well enough to even go back to Boston until the summer of '69. And even then, Prabhupada is a little reluctant to let her start painting again. He thinks it's getting her sick. But once the house is acquired, now Prabhupada's master plan can be formed. And now he's going to start sending devotees from his different temples to Boston. He's going to send Pradyumna and his wife, who are in Columbus. He's going to send Bhakta Mark, who became Murlidhar, and Devahuti, who are in Los Angeles. He's going to send Bardraj and Rukmini, who are in Montreal. He's going to send different devotees to start staffing ISKCON Press and the BBT Art Department. Now, the main plan, while this transcendental competition is going on, and Prabhupada is already envisioning how this is all going to happen, in New York, Prabhupada has sent or set up 4 or 5 key devotees who, in his vision, are going to be the core of ISKCON Press. And they're going to have to learn how to operate a press, how to operate a binder, how to operate this, how to operate that. So Prabhupada actually tells them, instead of going on Sankirtan every day, you're going to go and get a job in a printing house. You're going to go get a job in a photo house. You're going to get a job in a binding house. And he has them trading, like tradesmen, like in a union, trade. So I was going to tell this story just from my understanding and reading the Prabhupada letters. And then yesterday, an amazing book was placed in my hand. This book is called Srila Prabhupada's Miracle, the Transformation of Matter into Spirit. And it's written by one of those core devotees from ISKCON Press. His name is Vaikuntanath Das. And I'm going to just read to you 1 or 2 pages from this amazing book. I think I'm okay. Yeah, well, we're not ready for that yet. But we're almost there. In November of 1968, while in Montreal, I wrote a letter to Srila Prabhupada, asking him how I could best serve him. Immediately, a letter came back. He informed me that he was establishing a press. This is November of 68. The competition's going on. We don't have the house till September of 69, so it's almost a year early, right? He informed me that he was establishing a press for publishing. Advaita was skilled at running a printing press. Uddhava was experienced at photography and layout. Other devotees had other skills, but a bookbinding department was needed. Srila Prabhupada requested me to go to the New York temple to be with the other press devotees. They're already called press devotees. We don't even have a press. And to learn the art of bookbinding. Simultaneously, Srila Prabhupada requested Patit Udaran to go to New York to learn bookbinding. Arriving in New York, I met my new bookbinding partner, Patit Udaran. We each found a job in New York City, working at a bookbindery. We would work with one bookbindery for several weeks, and then switch to another company in order to learn as much as we possibly could. Patit Udaran began gold leaf embossing, cover making, and other aspects of fine bookbinding. It was fascinating working in these various bookbinderies, many of them small and quaint operations. I'm skipping. There was another fine bindery on 24th Street where I learned from a master craftsman whose family had been making fine bookbindings for generations. He showed me the art of rounding a book spine, applying the end sheets, and finally gluing on the cover. He was just happy to find a young person still interested in learning the craft. In the evenings, I took classes at the local printers union on Astor Place. There I studied the operation of the folding machine. After large printed sheets came off the press, a folding machine is needed to fold these printed pages into signatures or units of 8 or 16 pages. The folding machine requires a special skill to adjust the rollers just right. Otherwise, the pages will not be perfectly straight. The signatures are then sewn along the spine using a Smythe book sewing machine. So I began learning how to set and operate that machine. These 4 devotees could each have written their own paragraph on how they went to learn their trades. So through the early months, or the first half a year of 1969, Prabhupada has devotees who didn't have really a real background in this, learning how to operate this very complicated machinery. So it all comes together, and Prabhupada sends them all up to Boston in 1969. And there's a whole story which I don't have time for, this amazing way that Prabhupada raised the money to buy the press equipment. Another time, another talk. Okay, so now Jadharani's back, the press is up there. Oh, and we have to have a quick footnote about Narayan's role. The press and the binding machinery was placed on the ground floor of the new temple And there was a basement in this building, and the equipment was too heavy for the construction of that floor, the ground floor. And in order for the equipment not to crash down through the floor rafters into the basement, Narayan, who was considered the master engineer of ISKCON at the time, was called to Boston to develop a system for bracing from the basement the floor so the equipment wouldn't fall through into the basement. So hats off to Narayan for that. So now we come to the next chapter of this amazing story, which is the first ISKCON marathon. And for years, I confess that I thought that I had started the first Christmas marathon, the first ISKCON marathon. I really believed that. Which was 1972, book distribution, December Christmas marathon. But it turns out that that is not the first marathon. And by the way, the marathon that I thought I started lasted 3 whole days. We did sell 18,000 books and magazines in 3 days, but it was only 3 days. What I came to learn and marvel at is a marathon that Prabhupada started that lasted for 2 years. 2-year marathon, which I'd never heard of this before. So, up until the point of starting the paintings for the Krishna book, we all know none of the books had paintings in them. They had painted the Vishnu cover for Sri Isopanishad. The only other artwork that was going on for books were cartoon line drawings for Back to Godhead magazine. The painting department, the purpose of the painting department was to produce for every temple in ISKCON 5 paintings. Every temple in ISKCON needed the Acharya paintings, needed the Panchatattva paintings, needed the Lord Chaitanya Sankirtan party painting, and needed the Radha Krishna 8 Gopis painting. Prabhupada wanted every temple to have those 5 paintings. So whoever had any art skill had been painting wherever in the different temples, but when things got centralized in Boston, devotees who were inclined to paint were sent to Boston, and they practiced painting these copies, and these paintings were sent to now the growing world of ISKCON temples, so that soon 12, 15, 20 temples had these paintings, times 5. I mean, so the artists who weren't painting for the books produced approximately 100 paintings that were shipped to temples all over the world. So that was their own marathon. But for the books, however it got selected, what happened was we had Jadharani, we had Bhadraj who had come from Montreal, we had Murlidhar who had come from LA, and we had Devahudi who had come from LA. And Prabhupada said that what time is it? Okay, good. Prabhupada said he wanted a painting a day. They're going, what? Try to picture this. You're an artist. You've been a devotee for 2 years, 3 years maybe, or even only 6 months, like Bhakta Mark, Murlidhar. You're tasked with painting something that is supposed to exceed the greatest works ever known to man. You're supposed to paint something that is more beautiful than anything that Raphael or Da Vinci or Rembrandt has ever painted in their lifetime, because you are painting the beauty, the unlimited, infinitely unlimited beauty of God. So what is the Mona Lisa compared to the beauty of God? What is anything compared to that? So these poor artists they're shuddering. Like, how in the world can we accomplish this? What Prabhupada is giving the world is so great, and our skill and our ability is so small, it doesn't match. It's not even close. And then the letter comes, and he wants a painting a day? So there was a lot of concern. And as they were talking amongst themselves, they wrote to Prabhupada and said, we don't feel adequate. We don't feel up to this challenge. We think that our skills as artists are not that great. And we think we need to study seriously. Go to an art academy. Learn the great techniques of the greatest masters of art in the world, and maybe then we'll be able to do something that might slightly be worthy of what Prabhupada you're about to give to the world. A vision of God. How can we paint that? We don't even barely know how to paint. So Prabhupada explained something to them that is so extraordinary. He said, your whole concept of beauty is mundane. Actually, you don't even know what real beauty is. So Prabhupada began to teach these artists the definition of beauty. He said, there's two parts to understanding real beauty. The first part is that everything in the painting must be authorized, authentic. There can be no imagination, no fabrication, no fanciful imagination like poets and artists of the world who are trying to create an image of something that's beautiful based on what they've seen in the world. And we all heard Prabhupada say that in his purport on the Govindam album. He said, Prabhupada said, no, nothing in the painting can be inaccurate. It must be all correct and authentic from Shastra, from book Shastra, or from a living person Bhagavad. But you cannot know beauty. You don't even know what beauty is. You have to be told exactly how to present Krishna. He can't, for example, classic male beauty in paintings with muscular forms and so on. Prabhupada's explaining that's not beauty. The beauty of a spiritual body is soft. It's in a human form, but it's very soft. You don't see that musculature. So everything has to be authentic. It's not up to the artist to paint what they feel. That's the first definition of beauty that Prabhupada gave them. Quite different from anything they thought beauty was. And the second definition that Prabhupada gave them is that the only way you're ever going to achieve beauty is through your heart, through bhakti, through love of God, not devotion to anything mundane, not even a feeling of love for the mundane, but only through bhakti can a painting become beautiful. If you don't paint with bhakti, I don't care what it looks like, it's not accepted. So this is Prabhupada's definition of beauty. So now we come back to the problem that the artist had and how they proposed to Prabhupada that they wanted to go to art school. And Prabhupada said, no, that is not how you're going to learn how to paint beautifully. They may teach you how to paint in a mundane way, but that's not what I'm looking for. This is how you're going to learn how to paint, Prabhupada said. You're going to sit in front of your canvas 8, 10, 12 hours a day. Day after day after day. Marathon. And the entire time that you are painting, you are going to be chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Because I understand that you feel helpless. You feel totally inadequate, totally helpless. You're in total anxiety that you can't do this. And that's exactly the mood I want you to be chanting with. I want you to be so anxious, in so much anxiety, so desperate, that when you call out to Krishna, it is so deeply from the core of your heart, the greatest desperation that anyone has ever felt in life. That's how I want you to be chanting Hare Krishna while your hand is moving. And if you do that day after day, crying to Krishna for help, every single day, that you will learn how to be an artist. That's all the training you need. So now, there's so much more to these stories because I'll do my best. Well, let me just set one more scene for you. This marathon is starting in the fall and going into the winter of Boston, Boston 69-70 winter. I looked it up because when I heard this, I needed to look it up on historical records to confirm. That winter was supposedly the coldest winter in the history of Boston since they had been tracking weather. Okay? The artists were in the attic of this building, and everyone who was working at the press on any level, basement, first floor, or attic, typing, whatever, were wearing gloves. The temple had no heat. There was no money. Now try to picture this. They scraped up enough money for the canvas. The canvas was either leaning on the wall and they're sitting on the floor, or the canvas is flat on the floor and they're leaning over it, trying to paint fine lines of art wearing heavy wool gloves. That's how this marathon was done. Now I have to tell you that, well, let me show you actually. If this thing will allow me to show you. Okay, next, let's see, how do I get to the next? This way? No? How about this way? Okay. So these are the first 5 paintings that Prabhupada described before there was any tapes and any stories. Now, what I want to show you by looking at this is the level of the art that we started this marathon with. Very sweet, but very, very childlike, simple. But very accepted to Prabhupada because of his definition of beauty. Now watch what happens as this chanting process goes on. Oh, let me just go back to this for a minute. Almost every aspect of these paintings required communicating back and forth to Srila Prabhupada by letter. For example, Nanda Maharaj, what does he look like? Krishna's showing Mother Yashoda, what does she look like? How do you show the universe when Mother Yashoda is looking in Krishna's mouth? Prabhupada explained exactly in a letter how to do this. I want Mother Yashoda, I want Krishna, I want her looking in his mouth, and I want you to show in a balloon or circle above, outside, the universe. Prabhupada designed these paintings personally. And the amazing thing about Prabhupada is that whatever was coming up, what is this? What does Mother Yasoda look like? What does Krishna look like? What does Sandapani Muni look like? What does everything look like? They kept asking Prabhupada. All they had was a few Indian prints as references, and they had no idea if those were even authentically acceptable to Prabhupada or not. Look how this style is improving. Look at the effect of chanting Hare Krishna and painting with such a level of desperation that maybe none of us have ever experienced in our spiritual lives. But they did. I can't imagine how desperate they felt. This is in a matter of a month or so. Look at what's happening. What do these demigods look like? They had no clue. They had to ask Prabhupada. Every question had to be asked of Srila Prabhupada. And one of the amazing things, what's happening here? Why did it stop? All right, let's try. It's not moving. Okay. One of the most amazing things about our Srila Prabhupada is that no matter what question you ever asked him, what does life on this planet look like? Anyone else would have to either not know and do research and look up many, many books, and I'll get back to you in a month. Prabhupada instantly, as the question was asked, gave the answer about any. Try to visualize human form, animal form, natural landscapes. Gita was much harder. Fine art showing abstract philosophy. Prabhupada practically had to design every painting in the Bhagavad Gita. He had to tell them exactly how. We'll get to that in the next minute or two. Okay. Okay, so it became impossible. Okay, it became impossible to do a painting a day or even a painting a month practically. So what happened is Prabhupada had given an idea with the tapes how he wanted them composed and edited by different devotees simultaneously. As he described how he wanted the book production to work, it really sounded like an assembly line. So from those letters to the press devotees, the artists said amongst themselves, we can't keep up. There's no way we can keep up. Maybe we need to do the unthinkable for an artist. Have an assembly line? So somehow or other, they buried their egos. Bhadraj was the designer of the composition of each painting, once Prabhupada answered all the questions. Jadharani filled in all the color and form, and then Murladhar came to fill in all the fine finishing touches, the lights, the highlights, the jewelry, all the fine details. And most of the paintings that you're seeing in the Krishna book were painted by 3 artists working on each canvas. And by this technique, and Devahuti had her own style, so she was allowed to paint her own paintings by herself. But working in this way, the combination of the 4 of them averaged producing, are you ready? 2 paintings a week for 2 years. And I'll show you how I got to that number. I just don't want this computer to turn off. Look at what's happening by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Devahuti style is very distinct and unique. So, assembly line. I mean, you know, they have a painting of the god of the oceans. They didn't know, what is he supposed to look like, a watery body? I mean, they had no clue. Think about this. Prabhupada had to explain everything, how exactly to paint each personality. Okay, this is the one print that we used. Prabhupada liked it and authorized that we could actually use the print in the Krishnamukha. Everything else is an original. From the first painting to this, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Devahuti, look at that. So you get the idea, okay? There are 87 paintings in volumes 1 and volume 2, okay? This marathon started a little bit at the beginning of '69, was completely interrupted when Jadharani got sick, resumed again towards the end of '69, and when did George give the money? And when did Prabhupada get the Krishna Book Volume 1 printed? Early 1970? Not a lot of time to paint all these paintings. Isn't that amazing? Non-stop marathon. Oh, and if it wasn't for George, there'd be no Krishna Book because, as I said, Dinapan was not happy that we owed so much money on the magazine line. So when Prabhupada said to them, wait a minute, that's a separate department, that half convinced them. Then Prabhupada said, I'll tell you what, I'll pay up front for the first book printing, and after that, you'll let us use the book line. Dinapan said, okay to that. Prabhupada wrote to Shamsundar, go get the money from George. I'm sure you've all heard that story of how that happened. The lights went out, and the whole Shamsundar telling that story, and the money came, and Dinapan print. And so, early 1970, the Krishna Book came out, Volume 1. I'll just show you a few more. Look at this from where we started. Not bad for no art school. Exactly. The power of the order of the pure devotee, because within the order comes the potency to carry it out, comes the empowerment to carry out the order. There's no other way to explain this miracle. There's 87 paintings in the Krishna Book. There's 48 paintings in the Bhagavad Gita. That had to be finished by the end of 1971. And in between the Krishna Book and the Bhagavad Gita, they had to paint the second canto. There's 2 volumes, 7 paintings each. They had to paint for the Nectar of Devotion. And because Prabhupada was now introducing art in the books, they had to now reprint the first canto, 3 volumes, 7 paintings in each of those. So you've got 87 paintings in the Krishna Book. You've got 48 paintings in the Bhagavad Gita. You've got 21 paintings in the first canto. You've got 14 paintings in the second canto. You've got 7 paintings in the next. All of this had to be finished by the end of '71. Because then they had to start going back to the third canto, which Prabhupada was already by then on the fourth canto. So they painted 180 paintings in 2 years. This is unbelievable. By being empowered by Srila Prabhupada. And these paintings have a type of bhakti being impregnated into them by Prabhupada's order that I'm not saying it could never exist again. Of course it can exist again if that artist, this artist, is that surrendered, that in love with Prabhupada, and that in love with wanting to do this for Krishna. If you could ever reach that level of desperation again and pure chanting, yes, this could happen again. But these paintings are unique in all the world, and our material eyes cannot see the real beauty, the level of beauty that's in these paintings. As we make more and more advancement in our spiritual life, we'll actually be able to see levels of bhakti that our material eyes have never seen, and then we'll know the truth about these paintings and this amazing marathon, the first marathon in the history of the Hare Krishna movement. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Ramesvara Prabhu ki. Now this is just a primer because he's got a lot more to say, and we're looking forward to future festivals.